Right. Today I'm here with Andrew Hartz from Open Therapy Institute. And thank you for being here for this conversation. I'm really interested in what Open Therapy Institute is doing and learning more about it from you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Would you mind starting by introducing yourself and just give a little bit of your background and how you got involved in this conversation?
Yeah, so my name is Andrew Hartz. I'm a clinical psychologist. I wrote about issues related to therapist bias and overlooked populations in mental health. And that one thing led to another, and now we're building an institute called the Open Therapy Institute that's focused on providing clinical services for some overlooked populations that maybe have a hard time finding a therapist that gets them. And we're also focused on doing workshops, trainings for therapists to be better at working with these populations, and for people in those populations to get some skills and meet other people with similar issues. So that's my focus right now is the Institute.
Well, it's interesting when you say overlooked populations. That sounds like a similar sort of thing that critical social justice theory seeks to look at.
Right.
But how is this different, and how is your approach different from what we're seeing with the social justice lens?
Well, I think that some people, like, for example, if you face antagonism for your views at the workplace
Hmm.
or in social circles or something, um, you can just see a random therapist and maybe they'll be empathic to your experience and maybe they won't.
Hmm.
And you don't know how that's going to go. A lot of people with those experiences don't want to come to therapy because they think the field is antagonistic towards their values or towards their beliefs. Um, so, if somebody came to me and says, "Oh, well, I know somebody who's self-censoring or somebody who's attacked for their beliefs or they got fired or they're having this issue because they spoke up on an issue or can you help them find a therapist?" I would say, no, I don't know. I don't necessarily know where to go. There aren't a lot of places to find people who would be attuned to that. And they run the gamut politically. I think it's some people who have this experience are liberal, some are more conservative. There are people in the center, people with all different types of views. Sometimes it's about religious views, sometimes it's about political views. But that there are just lots of different populations where do you find an attuned provider? What if your issue is you're a man, you're feeling really emasculated in your marriage, you kind of want to find a way to have a sense of masculinity that's authentic to who you are and is healthy. Where do you find somebody who's good at that?
Hmm.
If you're somebody who, I think especially with a lot of kids, they're white, they go to a predominantly non-white school, they experience anti-white bullying or hazing of different types. Where do they go to somebody who's going to understand something about their experience and be empathic? At the same time that there are more and more groups of people that are feeling this way, feeling like lost and stuck and antagonized for what they believe or their values, the mental health field is moving in the opposite direction. Rather than trying to figure out how do we help these groups and develop clinics and resources to help people having these experiences, more often than not, the professionals in the mental health field, in leadership in organizations and things like that, are actually writing articles that are demonizing people with these views.
Hmm.
So there's a real need for resources. And not necessarily the therapists aren't necessarily at the Open Therapy Institute. They're not coming at this with like a political agenda to
Hmm.
impose at all. It's just about being open to
Hmm.
whatever their experience is and being attuned, listening, caring, and kind of having that assurance that you're not going to get shut down. You're not going to be, they're not going to avoid the issue. You don't have to lie about it. and you can really be open.
Well, it's interesting as you're describing that I guess I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but the invasion of the social justice ideology into the therapy field has created new overlooked populations.
Right. Well, the invasion of the ideology throughout society.
Hmm.
I think there are millions of people who are stuck. They're self-censoring, they're lying about their views, they're isolated. They don't have a way of formulating what's going on interpersonally, what they're feeling, why they're feeling what they're feeling. And a lot of them might not even realize that like therapy might be the ideal way to talk through these things and figure out what they think, because it's this private, confidential space where you get to have irrational feelings and contradictory feelings and talk through things to figure out what do you really think and what do you really want to do and what's going to be constructive.
Hmm.
But I think there's millions of people that are stuck and not sure what to do, and they really need help. But they're not. A lot of them aren't necessarily looking for therapists that are open, because there aren't therapists who are branding themselves that way, very many. And therapists aren't advertising themselves as focused on these groups because the groups aren't looking. So there's kind of like we need to raise awareness about both the need for therapists to do this work and to like let patients know, people in the world know that this is something that can really help if you're being antagonized or you're self-censoring or isolated or have some of these issues that you might be more afraid to bring up in therapy. Yeah.
Do you see this as a parallel structure to modern therapy institutions or therapy paradigms, or do you see this as complementary?
Say more about what you mean.
Like the Open Therapy Institute, the mission of is are we are as a culture and as a profession, are therapists needing to move into something? Is it time to give up on what's been going on conventionally, and as the pressures to conform to the social justice mindset, the trainings and the licensing bodies and the accrediting bodies
Right.
are really incorporating the social justice ethos heavily into what they do? Is
Right.
this creating a pressure to build a parallel structure, a parallel sort of profession, or is it something that's going to create a counter pressure on the industry, on the profession, to hopefully balance some of what's been going on ideologically? I hope that I articulated that
Yeah, I
okay.
hear what you're saying. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the in a lot of ways, what we're doing is the way therapy looked 10, 15 years ago. It's
Mhm.
kind of like a return to basics about being open and being non-judgmental. Um, it's not, I think that can be radical in a censorship culture because people don't have spaces like that.
Mhm.
So it can have this radical social transformative effect to allow people to have spaces where they don't have to self-censor and can say what they feel. I do think there is kind of like a radical piece to it. But the other angle of it is this isn't really that different from what therapy looked like 10 years ago. It used to be this way. It's both the problem with care now
Mhm.
in mental health and where it's trending, I think more, especially under recently trained therapists, maybe more than therapists that were trained a long time ago. But the problem isn't, partly is they're being taught to overtly insert these concepts into their social justice concepts into therapy and kind of impose these ideologies, even when those are antagonistic towards the patient or
Mhm.
potentially counter-therapeutic. And I think often they are counter-therapeutic. But the other side of it is, even when therapists say, okay, I'm not going to overtly politicize therapy, I'm not going to attack a patient for their views, but they don't understand anything about their experience, or they don't respect their values, or they don't have any thing to say that's helpful, or they're avoiding it, or they're inhibited, or they're uncomfortable, or they're like, like, I think to actually be attuned and do good work,
Mhm.
you have to be comfortable and know something about it. And that's definitely, even if private therapists are capable of doing that, and I think there are plenty who are, it's not being inculcated in the training, because in the training programs tend to be censorship cultures that are very ideological.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's not a place where you learn how to think empathically about people with a range of views, because they're not doing that with each other in the
Mhm.
program. And so I think increasingly therapists are becoming more activist, having
Mhm.
more of an activist mindset, and they don't like people with different views. They don't want friends with different views.
Mhm.
They don't want to be around people with different views. And I think the idea that they could just turn that off and then all of a sudden be a perfectly attuned therapist for somebody with opposite, I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Not only are they becoming more activist for whatever cultural reasons, but also they're being trained specifically to be activists. And there's also a selection bias, because the people who are going to want to go into that, for one thing, are going to see it as an activist opportunity,
Right.
and self-select into that kind of profession. But they're also the interview process for these schools, and I'm
Yes.
hearing from professors who have been involved in that, really does involve listening for students who are going to be already ready to push that, critical social justice mindset forward. So it seems like there's a real problem of modern therapy, the new therapists that are being trained. It's a
Right.
whole new crop of, I don't know, it's like as a group of people with a missionary position, that what does that do to the profession over the next, 10 to 15 years? What does that do to the future, or the immediate future of therapy? And
Right. Right.
when
Right.
I was in school, the pressure of this was so hard on me that I really struggled to complete my master's degree, and ended up at the end, I haven't completed it. I've been close to
Yeah.
the end of my coursework, and if you know the story that I've been telling, I have stopped at this point. It would and and it was torture going through that, because, like you said, the self-censorship and the gaslighting, and it's psychological. It's like a struggle session that you're going through in order to get through this training. So even someone who wants to resist that ideology probably doesn't come through it in a very healthy place. I mean, there's a lot of deprogramming and healing that needs to be done from an experience like that. So, and I don't know that my school was necessarily the most extreme. I'm hearing lots of examples that are fairly similar. Sometimes mine does sound like it stands out a little, but not that much. So what does that mean for the future of therapy, as young therapists and new therapists are being trained in this manner?
Yeah. I mean, my training looked like that towards the end.
Did it?
When I started, I mean, it was a PhD. So it's 6 years,
Okay. Yeah.
towards the beginning, it wasn't. It wasn't like that. Towards the end,
Okay.
it was.
Yeah.
And all the therapeutic principles, once social justice comes in, they all evaporate like
Right.
so quick, where the idea of like, okay, you can't use shame and aggression and censorship to try to erase unconscious feelings you don't like. What are we doing as a field if that's an effective intervention? Is like aggressively shame people to purify
Mm.
unconscious biases that you don't want them to have. Like if that's the best way to approach things, then that's what therapy should look like. We should just yell at people and shame them to be better, and then we'll fix it. So it's totally counter to the principles
Mhm.
of therapy to approach things that way.
Mhm.
um and it's kind of baffling that people would not point that out. I think it
Mhm.
shows how weird this moment is. But you also, I don't think you can get good clinical training as a therapist in a censorship culture.
Mhm.
Part of how you help patients open up is by being open and learning to be open yourself. And you do that in a program where people are open and help you be open. It's like, you hold in a lot of ways the openness that you a big part, maybe one of the most important things that a therapist does is facilitate openness.
Mm-hmm.
And that like creation of an empty space it's not nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly valuable. And you don't do that by being flat or stoic or inhibited or withdrawn. That's not it. That's not how it's more active. It involves empathy and curiosity and connection, and sometimes even disclosure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's about, that's how you facilitate openness. But a lot of how you communicate openness is even in how you carry your body as a therapist and how you react to things. And when you're comfortable as a therapist, when one's comfortable as a therapist with the full range of human emotions that comes up, that people feel that openness. And it's one of the most powerful curative forces, that exists. So you do that by cultivating openness. And the best way to get to acquire that is through training programs that foster openness.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to do that in an aggressive, politically fanatical censorship culture?
Mm-hmm.
So so it's bad training. And even just a little bit of this can really throw a wrench in the whole training process. And it's not like there aren't people who can then undo it to an extent and then go on to be great therapists independently, but the training programs are actually losing a lot by losing their ability to have dialogue and tolerate openness. It's really high cost, because this is one of the main things that therapists do, is help create openness and an empty space. And that's, so I think the danger to the field is more than just there's going to be politicization or something. It's really kind of strikes at the heart of therapeutic fundamentals that are going to get poisoned.
I really appreciate your description of that process of openness and the importance of openness in the training process as well as in therapy. And I think it's great how you describe that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, I'm putting myself in that position of the building of the rapport and the therapeutic relationship, and how important it is to be able to create a space for, we use the word safe space so much now that it's
Right.
like not, it lost a lot of its meaning and it sounds cliche, but a safe place for a person to share whatever they need to share and feel like they're going to be heard, and the person that they're speaking with is going to genuinely try to receive and understand from that individual's viewpoint whatever might need to come up. And
Right.
and I'm thinking about the program that I've attended, this graduate program, and how completely opposite that experience was, because of the amount of discomfort and orthodoxy and the balancing. How much do I want to speak up when something feels really wrong, or I feel like what's being said sounds counter to, as you say, therapeutic principles, and
Right.
how much I should censor myself for the sake of getting through this. And so there's a contraction there. It's the opposite of openness. And I that's a brilliant way to draw that contrast out. So thank you for that description.
Yes. And I think it's yes. And it's, the safe space thing is interesting to me, because it's like, is it safe for dialogue, or is it safe from dialogue?
Yeah, that's a good point.
What's the safety here for? I think and with the open, I think if you asked everybody involved in Open Therapy Institute, and I think we have really great people involved, but if you ask them, what is it, how do you facilitate openness, or how do you become an open therapist? I think everybody would give you a little bit of a different answer, honestly, which is great because they have different theoretical orientations and different personalities. And I think they'd all give a slightly different answer to that.
Mhm.
But I think I don't think that it's like, I don't think that people think openness is you just always agree with the patient.
Mhm.
You always tell them they're right or something.
Mhm.
That's not, you can't always agree with every patient on every issue. That's not the point.
Mhm.
That's not why you're in therapy, is to have somebody tell you you're right about everything. But it is about having the ability to have a dialogue and having the ability to be.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes therapists candor about this is what I think is going on.
Mhm.
Actually, that doesn't shut people down. That opens up
Mhm.
because you're being honest and you're being candid. And I think a lot of times that actually helps patients open up, rather than the other way around. So, but it is a subtle thing of
Mhm.
like, how much do you share and how much do you give space? And but we need to have a discourse on this topic, and
Mhm.
especially related to patients with a variety of different viewpoints, where those viewpoints are sometimes, politics don't need to be a part of every therapy. I
Mhm.
don't think they're not important to every patient. They
Mhm.
just aren't. But there are a lot of people for whom they're really central to what they're experiencing and what they need to talk about. And then there are also people where there's a clinical issue. It's like, okay, it's panic disorder or something, but their politics are a part of their life, or the
Mhm.
self-censorship issues at work are a part of their life.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes patients have a conception that, well, I can just hide that part and get help with the panic attacks,
Mhm.
whatever, and then I'll just hide it or lie about it because I don't want to have an issue. But it doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
It's like it's really can, maybe sometimes you can still get a lot out of a therapy doing that, but I think having parts of your life and your identity and your experience that you feel like you have to hide from the therapist can really derail the whole process of letting feelings happen as they happen and letting them go as they go.
Mhm.
And it's like it can really inhibit that whole process, even though it's just one part, and you think it's not really related to the panic attacks, but you don't know. Um, so
So like
there's a lot.
from a somatic perspective, it's like how can you release something when you're clenching something else?
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. Or how can you speak freely about, people get inhibited
Mhm.
when they just have one little thing that they can't say. And then they're like, I guess I got nothing to say. But they do have something to say. They just don't want to say that thing. Freud has this essay in his papers on technique. He talks about free association, and he has this whole spiel that's worth reading that he tells patients of what to do. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
The papers on technique are good. They're worth
Okay.
reading. And he has this whole thing about, like, imagine you're on a train and you're looking at the window at the scenery going by, and the scenery going by is your thoughts. And you're just going to describe everything that's going by. And if you think this isn't important, or I don't really want to share that, especially be sure to share that stuff. That's
Mhm.
the stuff that you most want to be sure to say. So just talk through whatever you're seeing through the window on the train.
Mm.
And but if you say, oh, I really don't want to share this, or I'd rather not, or that's not important, especially be sure to share that stuff. It's often it's often really the good stuff is there.
I can't even imagine trying to do that kind of technique with a therapist that you're holding back on political stuff because you're afraid of judgment. I can't
Right.
even imagine. Yeah. That's a
And a
really good
lot of people
illustration.
are.
Mm,
Yeah, and a lot of people are.
mhm,
And it's not, even if you're not doing like, you're not doing psychoanalysis, you're not doing like a classical free associative method, that's fine.
mhm,
But the principle is the
mhm,
same of like, oh, well, I really don't want him to know about this part of my life or
mhm.
her to know about this part of my life. That can really gum up things more than I think a lot of patients realize.
So when you're talking about the politicization of therapy, which is, it does seem like it's moved to this, therapy is from the left for the left in a lot of cases right now. Not everywhere, and not uh, therapists that were trained prior to the last decade or so, but for in a lot of cases, and definitely what we're seeing is trending that way. What does clinical competency for viewpoint diversity look like?
Right, right. I mean, I would say in terms of by the left, for the left, I think that the field has failed to cultivate dialectical thinking
Mhm,
on a range of topics. And for people that don't know, who might be listening, dialectical thinking is the ability to frame issues as having a trade-off of pros and cons and risks and benefits and evidence for and evidence against. And in a lot of therapies, especially DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, but other therapies too, the ability to see things as pros and cons is really a prerequisite for mental health. It's really central. And when people can't do it, that can be linked to pretty severe impairments.
mhm,
Um, we as a field in mental health have like not we don't have a culture of thinking dialectically around a lot of these controversial issues. So if you look at the texts that are assigned in classes, the journals, the statements by professional bodies, what's being presented at conferences, every indication of what's happening in the field, the listservs, the professional listservs people are on, every one of these, what you find is almost everything, if not everything, is coming from one side of the dialectic. Nothing on the other side is mentioned. There's no discussion of the other side. And this really indicates severe distortion of what's happening and real emotion dysregulation, that people can't tolerate talking about complex things with the understanding that they have pros and cons and that there's different value systems involved. And so I think there are a lot of people in our field who recognize this, but they're afraid to speak up. And what that's enabled is it's enabled a kind of all or nothing framing
mhm,
of issue after issue after issue. And it's I think it's unhealthy for training, it's unhealthy for professionals in the field, but it leads to real distortions in views of patients.
mhm,
And I'll give one example, which is there was a talk at a conference which I did not attend, but they theorized that wearing a face mask, refusing to wear a face mask during COVID pandemic was a manifestation of this death drive gone wild, that you want to kill yourself and kill everybody else. And it's this kind of psychopathic, suicidist, mass murderous, malignant thing. And, you know, and I could think of a formulation of somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask as like the ability to see somebody's face and have your face be seen is pretty central part of human relationship and human relatedness. And it's central to emotion regulation and interpersonal connection and mental health.
mhm,
And it could be this healing pro-social desire to connect to other people. And it's an act of love and affection or a desire for those things. And so when you see issue after issue being framed in this kind of all or nothing way, they're all on one side. nothing's representing. Is there another way of looking? Is this true for everybody who doesn't wear a mask? Like they're all just bad, evil people who have this, unfathomable, malignant desires. It's like, I think when you see talk after talk like that, you get a sense of like, how are these therapists treating somebody who comes in who doesn't want to wear a mask? This is really, this is the conclusion you're going to jump before you even hear what they have to say about why they want to watch them. I mean, maybe there is somebody who's like really twisted person and they want to do that. And I'm open to that happening here or there. That could motivate somebody, but it's every time. And when you have so many people in the country that are opposed to this and you're just going to write them all off. So you get a sense of just not understanding large swaths of the country. And there's this kind of self-righteousness in the viewing all of these issues in all or nothing terms in a way that anybody who really believes this is setting themselves up to clash with a lot of patience. And maybe say, well, I'll just repress it and I won't talk about it. But I still think it can come through in your therapy, even if you're trying to not talk about it with your patients because you feel they're these psychopathic mass murderers. But you're just going to not say that and pretend to be neutral. I mean, I think that's hard to do. So there are all of these. That's just masking. That's just masking. But you can think about issues related to race and gender and sexuality and religion, and like where if these attitudes really start taking over the field and they're growing, it really indicates that you're going to have a lot of therapists who are just not competent to treat large swaths of the country. Because how many people have one of these views?
Well, and
all of them.
It's anti-intellectual, it's anti-scientific, it's irrational to select one. It's putting two points together with a hypothesis that you don't bother to test against other possible hypotheses. So it's the same with the Trump voter thing. Like anybody who voted for Trump, well, they're racist, they're a bigot, there's no other reason why someone who's voted Republican on every ticket their whole life would have continued to vote Republican. There's no other reason. It must be, and they were a racist, otherwise they would have voted for Hillary. So it's just that whole process of drowning out alternative pathways. I think I've mentioned this before in a conversation on this channel, but I started doing this exercise with my kids a long time ago when we would drive and somebody would be driving like, doing something erratic or crazy or really fast on the highway. Instead of calling that person a jerk or thinking, wow, what a careless person, we would come up with reasons why that person might be doing that. So instead of just, what a jerk, look at him cutting people off, or he almost, ran into us. We make up a story that his dog is vomiting in the back seat and he's like panicking, trying to, or maybe his mom called and she needs him to get there fast. And some of them are comical and some of them are sad, but we'll come up with, and sometimes we'll try to find the best story for what, and that's just one little way to examine other people's motives, not from your first assumption, but because there's a whole breadth and depth of human motivation that we should be aware of. And especially I would think as people who are in the applied psychology field, you should be prepared to be surprised by what might actually motivate someone and not assume before knowing more that you already you've got them summed up just by knowing a couple of data points.
That's so critical. Exactly right. And there's no curiosity. I mean, what do you say? I mean, you don't want to know you don't want to ask a follow-up question when you already know that it's just pure, unfathomable, malignant desire that is who they are. Why talk about it? So, and it's like, and that's that's a central thing about what therapists do, is like just being curious and like thinking about it. And and the same behavior could have a lot of different meanings for lots of different people. Somebody, it's, it has to do with mistrust of institutions, and somebody else, it has to do with feeling stifled or suffocated, and somebody else, it's like a desire to, it's loneliness, and you could just see all those as being potential. You don't know, which is like to just kind of write it off that way. And a lot of this literature, like there is an increasing body of literature, it's not dialectical. There's not an openness of like, there's a lot of complexity. And a lot of it, it's like, it's this extreme one-sided framing of issues with a lot of aggression in it. I mean, that's an aggressive formulation. I don't even know, we don't even usually frame psychopaths that way. Like the field tries to think about somebody who's a serial killer as like, what happened in their childhood that made them a serial killer? Like even somebody who's like literally killing people or doing something horrible, we try to formulate in an empathic way.
Right.
And so the idea that we're not going to try to formulate things in empathic ways anymore. We're just going to form them in this kind of like, we're just going to totally demonize them in this all or nothing way.
Right.
And the idea that the thing that's really scary about the field is either everyone's agreeing with that at the conference, or the people that disagree are afraid that if they point any of this out, they're going to face severe professional reprisals and social reprisals. Probably both are happening. They're both really scary, because you have therapists that are like, you can't have therapists that are thinking about their patients in large swaths of the country in these terms, or they're going to be providing really bad care. On the other hand, if they don't really believe in this, but they're afraid to say something, then dialogue amongst ourselves is really broken on these issues. And that's really concerning too. Yeah, so it's not a good sign to see lots of the field take this turn.
Yeah, I think it's really the example you gave about understanding the psychopath. It's a great example. It's really, it really highlights the contrast. I mean, one of the final straws for me with my graduate program was when my faculty advisor told me that they are aware, and she said, in faculty meetings, we know and we talk about the fact that we're no longer training counselors who are going to be able to work with the Trump supporter. And so this was just, it hit me really hard that this was being said, not because I have some affinity for Trump, but because it shouldn't matter at all what little political niche your client comes in from, to say that I'm going to reject you on those grounds and I'm not going to be able to work with you. Where you can do, as you say, these analyses of what might make someone do horrible things that we are supposed to be able to do. We're supposed to be able to try to understand and reach out to someone across the terrible things that they may have experienced or done. But this one thing, this political misalignment, can be cause for severing the ability of someone to even access mental health treatment.
It's totally unethical.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's a responsibility that therapists have to treat people, and to just say this huge chunks of the country don't deserve mental health care. We're just going to deny it to them. I mean, that's a murderous desire. And it will lead to like real suffering, and even things like suicide and unnecessary death. So it really is, that's so aggressive. And it's scary to see people in this helping profession of therapists express aggression at that level in an institutionalized, as an institution. I mean, it's not just a lone person. It's like, and it's scary.
Mhm.
And it's things like that really damage the trust in the whole field. And yeah, that's really interesting. And that she just said that point blank to you. It's
Mhm.
like they know that they're abandoning all of these patients, and they're
Mhm.
doing it deliberately.
And that's the culture of that was the culture of the school, at least, was such that it didn't even seem like she was making a confession about it. It was sort of offhand. It was sort of just a casual, like
Right.
almost with a laugh. Oh yeah, we know this. If you don't like this, the social justice ideology, you'd better get through the program quickly because it's only going to intensify. Was
Right.
the message being given. So it was, yeah, it's everything that you say. And um so going back to Open Therapy Institute, does how do therapists access this, and how do clients access this, and what's the mission? Is it sort of a directory? Do therapists sign on and become and agree to some sort of a mission statement, and then clients can also access a directory of people who are
Right.
committed to open principles?
We are managing some therapy referrals.
Okay.
Um, we're not in every state.
Okay.
It's only states that are in PsyPact. Do you know what
Okay.
PsyPact is? That
I
PsyPact is
think
like,
you've told me, but I
I
don't.
told you.
Yeah.
It's there are some states where if you're a psychologist licensed in one state, you can join PsyPact and you're licensed in all of them.
Okay. Yes.
And it's probably about 35 or 40 states.
Okay.
There are a couple states that aren't in it.
Mhm.
But we have providers licensed in California, New York, and SIPAC states right now.
Okay.
Um, and we're kind of building, we're slowly building an in-house network of providers to start to see some of these patients, primarily with an eye towards, I mean, providing care is goal number one, but also kind of documenting issues in treatment and what people are coming in
Mhm.
with, and
Mhm.
what's going on, and kind of starting to develop best practices in this area and things like
Mhm.
that. So we do have some people that are doing that who are, they're primarily people that don't take insurance that are very highly skilled
Mhm.
psychologists and psychiatrists, but it's limited.
Mhm.
And then we are also doing workshops
Mhm.
for professionals to kind of talk about some of these issues and offer trainings in these issues. We do aim to provide a certificate program. It would be for people who are therapists that they could put that they have the certificate on their profile, and it would indicate something about um, that they care about these issues, they strive to be open, and that they've received some training in the area. But I think we're going to have other types of workshops as well, continuing education workshops. And I think we also really want to have workshops for the general public, where people who are struggling with a certain issue can come in maybe a large group format and hear some views, practice some skills, have some discussion groups, connect to other people who have similar issues. So I think so. It's basically therapy and workshops, and the workshops are both for professionals and for people in the general public.
Mhm. And so you say there will be some sort of accreditation or certification at some point offered that might be something that a professional could use to indicate this affiliation that a client might be able to look for. But that sounds like it's a
Right.
little down the road right now.
It's down the road, but yes, it would be kind of a way for therapists to signal that they're invested in being open.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't think it would have a legal status of like anything like that, but it would have it's kind of more of something that patients can look for as like, this is somebody who tries to be open. And the people involved, I think it is important to say the people involved in the Open Therapy Institute have a wide range of political views, a wide range of theoretical orientations in terms of their practice. They practice in really different ways. The main thing is this commitment to being open
Mhm.
and to kind of actually be thinking about, what does this really look like? And I think it does, sometimes it involves what you're doing in the session, but it also involves like an awareness of certain issues and certain things people are going through, and having some understanding of theory and thoughts about what's happening and what people are experiencing too. So I think, so I definitely think that's in the works as well.
Mhm, mhm. Sounds like a wonderful resource, and I look forward to watching this grow. And I kind of come back to a question that I have, and I don't know if anybody's working on this right now, but it seems very troubling that the training programs right now are so compromised, because there are people who are right now wanting to embark on this profession, have a lot to offer, who will not do it because of the content of the training programs. I've watched people drop out of the program that I was in. I
Right.
ended up dropping out eventually of the program. And I think that we're going to see just a selection problem of people who want to practice therapy in this kind of classical model, the pre-social justice model, not going into the field. And so
Yeah.
how do we respond to that? I picture the need for alternative training offerings.
Yes, I think like having some degree granting programs that are not having degree granting programs that are not captured by this ideology
Mhm,
is something we need to develop. I agree. I also think every therapy training program in the country should require a course in competency to treat diverse viewpoints, and in these issues of how to be open and how to treat people with different values. And if they don't, they're really setting the field up to just not be able to treat most of the country. I mean, it's a
mhm,
majority of a large majority has at least one unorthodox view on something.
right.
So to train an entire field that can only treat the ideologically perfect minority is, I think it's not viable.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that every program in the country needs to have training on this issue, and I think we need as many independent organizations as possible too. It would be good to have a degree granting institute that trained people this way. We don't have that yet. I don't think Open Therapy Institute would be equipped to do something like that for some time, but it's definitely needed.
It sounds like you're describing the antidote to the social justice lens when you talk about treating diverse viewpoints. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
wish we
even
could see
just
that.
having, if you have one faculty member who is invested in this, all of a sudden that's a resource and a voice for any student who has these concerns.
Mhm,
And if you're signaling that this is a place where we value dialectical thinking and dialogue and treating and interacting with people with a range of viewpoints, uh, that can really snowball and have a big effect on a whole program. I would say one thing that I think is for people that, well, people in the field or not in the field, um, the barometer of how well the field is at treating people with diverse viewpoints is what the training programs look like and what the literature looks like. And when that has a range of viewpoints and is really talking about these issues, um, and talking about these overlooked populations,
mhm.
that's a sign that it's improving. If that's not happening, that's a sign that the care is continuing to deteriorate. So,
Well, that's a great point. Well,
okay.
and I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me about this. And what would you direct people to the Open Therapy Institute webpage, or where would people
Yeah.
follow this and follow you?
Yes, they can go to the it's opentherapyinstitute.org.
Okay.
That's the website. People can go there. They can sign up for the mailing list. They should do that. We'll announce workshops and other programs. If they're interested in psychotherapy, they can contact us. If they're a provider and they're interested in getting involved, they can contact us. If we do have social media coming, we have a Twitter account and stuff like that. They're not so active yet. We have Facebook and Instagram, but they need to be built up a little bit, but we're there too.
Do you want to say them, or do you want me to link them in the
Link them.
Okay, I will link them then.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for taking the time to speak with me today. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Great. Lovely talking. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.